Hi there everybody, and welcome to episode 290 of The Art of Procurement with me, Philip Eidson. Well, long-time listeners might recall that I've been fortunate to experience procurement from both the direct and the indirect sides of the spectrum. So while the investment in technology over the past few years that we've talked a lot about on the show has heavily skewed towards supporting the purchasing of indirect products and services, it often feels like technology on the direct side of the house remains behind the curve, with a lot of companies still relying on legacy and often systems that were built in-house. Well, I recently spent some time with Sundar Kamak. Sundar is the global head of manufacturing solutions at Ivalua, and I invited him on the show to discuss this issue of digitization in the manufacturing space. So we talk about some of the trends in the marketplace and what procurement leaders can do to get started if they're actually considering upgrading their tech stack to more effectively balance costs, quality, and supply assurance within their manufacturing supply chains. As usual, I start by asking Sundar if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
I would say procurement found me because I do not have a lot of background in procurement, even though I came from a supply chain background, but most of my experience is supply chain planning and production operations and things like that. Procurement found me when I initially started almost 20 years back in an e-commerce startup company building strategic sourcing solutions. That was when I got introduced to procurement. And it's been a fun ride all along, almost 20 plus years in procurement.
And so you've been in the manufacturing space for the majority of your career, is that right?
Right. I mean, now I've been in the technology space the majority of my career,
right.
But in the past, it was all manufacturing, both aerospace and automotive manufacturing. That was my background, and I also dealt with supply chain. So procurement was the next segue into embracing, the brighter side of what needs to be done.
Yeah. One of the things when I was looking back at your career, you had a stint with Covisint, and that was a blast from the past for me. So I was in the auto industry, just getting into it in about 2000 when Covisint was started. It's one of those things that probably had such an outsized impact on procurement, but as a business, it kind of went from being something created, I think, by the big three, wasn't it, to CompuWare, and it got handed off a couple of times to various different parties.
Right, exactly. I mean, I did start when the big three was forming partnerships to build the e-business marketplace, especially being in the automotive industry, coming from the automotive industry. It was a natural entry into Covisint. So it was, again, as you said, a blast from the past. Covisint has changed hands multiple times. Part of the business that I was affiliated on the strategic sourcing side was sold to free markets and Reba, and hence my foray more deeper into procurement. The remaining parts of the business were sold to CompuWare, which eventually got resold to OpenText.
Yeah, that was the most recent, wasn't it? A couple of years ago.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, it was all merged into OpenText, which, interestingly, OpenText was companies, the OpenText for GXS was one of the first companies which looked at Covisint almost 16 years back.
They got it. They got it eventually.
They got it eventually later, 16 years later, at a much higher price point.
So in the conversation today, I want to talk a little bit about digitization in the manufacturing space, more specifically, because it's one of those areas that there's so many legacy systems that I think digitization is probably a more painful and perhaps even a slower process up until this point. And now I sense there's some real momentum for some of the larger organizations, like I guess knocking down a lot of barriers to investing in external technology. And so I just wonder if you, from your perspective, could share a little bit about What does digitization in procurement look like today in manufacturing?
Yeah, digitization, especially in procurement, is all about efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, in order to continue to be more efficient and take cost out of the process, especially in product development, you really need to digitize processes, whether you are in product development, whether you are in manufacturing operations, or you are in sales and distribution. It really doesn't matter. So, in terms of procurement per se, procurement traditionally, especially in manufacturing companies, has been going after what we traditionally call the indirect spend for many years, trying to digitize that.
Yeah.
And it has come to a point after almost 20 plus years, most organizations are realizing there's only so much you can harness that indirect spend. The bigger opportunities lies in harnessing and digitizing all their procurement and supply chain processes and bringing all types of spend under management, which includes indirect, direct, capital expenses and services. And we are really right now in a very unique position, especially in the manufacturing world, where there is so much globalization has already happened, and every dollar saved is dollar to the bottom line.
Yeah.
You're starting to see more digitization in the procurement and supply chain, more towards digitizing their direct materials.
Mm-hmm. Now, how does that connect in with? So obviously manufacturing, ERP is such, it's the driver ultimately of the business and the forecasting and everything that kind of connects in with there. How does the digitization of procurement specifically tie into an ERP? Is it, are organizations looking at upgrading their ERP first and then procurement it becomes a subset of it, or are they doing these things in silos? I mean, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. It all depends on the journey many of these organizations are taken, and also where they are in their journey. So, if you really think about how the role ERP played in the manufacturing industry, especially for procurement, ERPs typically help manufacturing companies to collaborate within their internal team, whether it is within the supply chain planning team and to some extent the procurement organizations. It's all very internal. Now, as we all know, procurement is just not internal collaboration. Most of the benefits are actually gained through external collaboration with suppliers and their partners. And that's where ERPs do not have a solution to address what we call inter-enterprise collaboration, right? So you really don't have architecture or system in place which allows both the buy side and the sell side to collaboratively, whether it is on product development or whether they are working on quality processes or on the manufacturing side, on the manufacturing operations side. And ultimately, if you think about the role procurement and supply chain plays in a manufacturing company, it's about basically balancing cost reduction, supply quality, and making sure they have assurance of supply, especially in their quest to maximize profits, right?
Yeah.
So end of the day, it's about maximizing profits and driving more margin to the bottom line. But it should not be at the cost of quality or assurance of supply. And that's also a very difficult position. It puts the procurement organization and manufacturing company to balance what I call the trifecta, all these three different things. And in order for them to do these things, they need digitization at the core, which currently are not provided by the ERP systems. You need to have procurement solutions which addresses beyond the indirect spend to get into the direct and the capital expenses to drive down the efficiencies in the supply chain area.
Yeah, I certainly remember back in the day managing new product development from a procurement perspective by spreadsheet. So, you'd have a new end item that was launching on, a new vehicle or a new model year, and maybe for one particular subsection you may have had 100 components, and you'd be managing all that on a spreadsheet rather than a system, because those
Right, right.
systems were good for basically placing orders based on forecasts, the business as usual, but they weren't good, I always found, for product development. It was really a
Correct.
struggle for
Right.
product development.
And absolutely. And that is very key. I'm glad you brought this up, because what we are seeing in manufacturing organization is it's easy to say you got to balance cost, quality, and assurance of supply, but you also have to build a competitive advantage to survive, which means you're all the way from introducing new products. If you really think about a typical manufacturing organization, product development engineers typically are a lot more powerful than procurement, and they actually start the process in terms of identifying the suppliers and the key partners they got to work with, and they already decide what designs they got to work with and who procurement needs to collaborate as they continue down the path. But the challenge there is procurement in this particular scenario is an afterthought in the process, which not only delays the introduction of new products, but also introduces other complexity in terms of quality and making sure you can produce a part within the target cost, which engineering has come up with. And that's where the traditional ERP system don't have a solution. You have PLM systems, product lifecycle management system, which allows organizations to aggregate parts and aggregate specs and work on design. You have ERP systems where you can actually go and buy those parts, but there's nothing in between that bridges the gap. It bridges the gap and drives collaboration between a procurement organization to get involved at the get-go when they're designing for manufacturing, like PFM.
Yeah.
And the second piece is the quality doesn't get involved until it comes to when the supplier has been nominated, and then you got to go through a PPAP or APTP process. So, and this actually creates challenges because every step in the process has got multiple touch points, and there's not a collaborative platform which can be used to bring in all these stakeholders together, along with their other external partner, which is going to be the suppliers, all of them on the same page, agreeing to the same deliverables and tracking to the same success metrics each organization has to work for.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of times I had an engineer design in, a component that basically created a monopoly with a target cost, I don't know, 30, 40% lower than what the real cost was. And you extrapolate that across everything, and it's a real challenge and a real opportunity. So, when you look at the new technology that's available, are you seeing procurement tech that's now able to bridge that gap?
Absolutely. With some of the innovations, even from companies like Ivalua, they are able to see synergies in bringing, first of all, the two key organizations talking to each other, which is both the procurement as well as the engineering organization, working collaboratively very upstream in the process, even when it's at the design stage. So procurement really understand the design criteria, so they can actually help choose the right supplier who can actually produce the part with the right quality metrics and also at the right price. Because end of the day, you can produce a very high quality part, but if you're not able to maintain margins or not able to maintain costs, you're not going to be very profitable. And and you have seen that in the automotive industry, where manufacturing sedans, especially cars, has become very challenging. Yeah. Good quality parts are coming out from every automotive manufacturer, but at what cost? Right? What cost? Can they compete in the industry? And you're seeing some of those outcomes where organizations are declaring that they're not going to be manufacturing cars anymore. They're going to get into some other high-value business, which is going to help them, high-margin business, which is going to help them drive more value to their shareholders, and value to their organization.
So as you start to look at there's obviously the new technology as well in the market. And I don't want to say new. It's new when I look at the context of what I was working with, 12 years ago. But I'm sure that the technologies aren't necessarily new in the grand scheme of things. It's more about adoption. As a procurement leader who's listening to the pod today, who's in the manufacturing sector, that has a system from a procurement perspective that he doesn't feel is fit for purpose, where do you start? Like, where does the journey start to think about, okay, does it make sense for us to look at some different options?
It always makes sense to look at, to have options, right? It always to have options, to look at multiple options. I think gone were the days where procurement and supply chain made an assumption saying that, hey, ERP is going to help solve all my issues, right? All my challenges. So if you really think about looking at bridging the gap between what is traditionally product development and what actually ends out in a manufacturing plant out of the door, there is huge gaps in terms of touch points between the various teams as well as the various systems in place.
Yeah.
So manufacturing companies are basically moving towards system capability. Again, it's all about digitization, right? Digitization starts with making sure you're automating your processes. In order to automate your processes, you need to have systems in place, and gone where the reliance on legacy systems based on on-premise and behind the firewall technologies, right? Now you have newer technologies based on cloud and based on cloud computing, which actually gives multiple options to manufacturing as well as engineering to basically launch very quickly, get the solution launched very quickly, and also help them drive adoption, because some of these technologies which are in play are based on newer standards and newer user experiences, which we have traditionally seen in the business to consumer space. And again, with the workforce changing over, right? We are starting to see a lot of changeover in workforce, that the baby boomers are slowly retiring, and the new workforce is coming on board. But the newer folks are used to more modern systems, which they typically use in their personal lives. Everybody uses the Amazons and the Googles of the world in their personal life, with the mobility in their fingertips, and they expect the same thing in technologies which they use in their office. There is no reason why some of those same technologies and some of those innovations can be utilized when they actually drive or digitize procurement in their organization. And that's also one reason which is prompting procurement and supply chain leadership in manufacturing companies to look at different options in terms of upgrading not only their technology, but also the user experience to drive adoption, so that eventually they are actually gaining efficiency, which leads to other operational benefits they have, not only reducing costs but also visibility. Yeah. Lack of visibility is one of the killers for many organizations, right? If you don't have visibility into not only a forecast but also what is going to be a future demand, it's very difficult for organizations to plan and set the right course for them to be successful.
So when you think about the whole life cycle, like the supplier life cycle, where are folks typically looking to invest? Are they looking upstream and the planning, the forecasting, the sourcing, bringing together data and insights and analytics? Or are they starting with more traditional procure to pay, or in the manufacturing space, is that really taken care of, by a separate system?
So it's a great question, Phil. So our experience working with manufacturing companies, we are seeing two distinct initiatives coming from organizations. And it all depends on where the organization has been, where they started their journey.
Yeah.
So in a number of cases, there we have seen a lot of inquiries as well as call for help is bridging the gap between what is traditionally product development and strategic sourcing. Because in the case of direct material, these two functions have to work hand in glove.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't, then you're going to have a break in process, and you won't know what your left hand does, or the right hand doesn't know what the left hand does. And that is actually not good, especially when there is a huge impact on your margins as well as your operational flaws very upstream in the process.
Yeah.
So we are starting to see organizations using or looking for tools which helps them to basically bring in what is traditionally called the PLM sort of data set, which is the bill of materials and the part information, into the strategic sourcing process without having to rely on Excel spreadsheets. If you really think about it, Excel has been a very good tool over the years, but it also is a tool which doesn't foster a lot of collaboration and visibility.
It's a one-to-one kind of tool.
It's a one-to-one kind of tool. It actually works well if you only have one customer, only one employee in the company.
Yeah.
So if you have more than multiple employees, multiple departments, multiple customers, then Excel is not a good tool to use. And we are starting to see that organizations that we're traditionally using Excel to manage either a product development or a new product introduction process, or APQP or advanced planning and quality process using an Excel, moving from an Excel to a collaborative platform, which allows them to bring in input from a PLM system, do their work in the collaborative platform, and push the results back into an operational system or an ERP system so that they can continue to execute. So that's what we are seeing. On the one hand, we have a number of examples where, especially in automotive and aerospace companies, we have taken on new product introduction, we have taken on advanced planning and quality processes, which are traditionally done in an Excel spreadsheet, are all moving away from Excel spreadsheet and doing it in a collaborative platform, which companies like Ivalua provides.
So when you're looking for one of those kind of tools, I mean, what's the biggest things to look for? What's the biggest what has to be present in a tool like that, for it to even pass the test to go to a further deep dive?
Absolutely. Great question. So when you're looking for a tool, number one, there are three key things in my mind I keep hearing from customers, and I also see it integral to when choosing a tool. Number one, ability for these tools to be able to be launched very quickly. It should not take months and months of work to deploy a solution. So the ability to launch the products very quickly, mostly using cloud-based technologies. That's probably a table stakes, especially when we are dealing with a lot of these organizations. Number two is user experience. It's all about adoption. You're asking, or you're basically, in a nutshell, asking or forcing your users to move from something which are very comfortable, called Excel, to something which is a lot more dynamic and a lot more. It changes quite a bit, but at the same time, user visibility, which is only can be achieved if there is fantastic user experience with the modern touch and feel, and also with mobility enabled. Because nobody, if you really think about it in the B2C world, nobody taught us how to use Amazon or use eBay. eBay, very natural. There's no user manual. There's no training classes to go to. You just start using. That is the same expectation you're going to get, especially when choosing tools like this. And the third area is a combination or organization, the tools to be able to bring in data from external sources. Integration is key, right? Data which can be legacy data. They can be in a legacy system, which for whatever reason you still have to use until you can't completely get rid of. And using legacy data provide forward-looking intelligence, actionable intelligence. That's all combined. The last part is important because we can actually do a very good user experience, a great process, but you cannot drive any outcomes out of it. You cannot give any predictable outcomes or predictable intelligence out of it. Then the tools becomes just like an Excel. It doesn't really help. It's just a tool. So to us, these are the three things we keep hearing from from our customers, our organization where we deal with, and different. This is not exactly how it's being spelled out in an RFP or anybody coming to us and saying, this is what I need.
Yeah.
But in general, if you take all the feedback and from different segments within an organization or across multiple geographies, this is what it distilled down to the 3 or 4 things which we just discussed.
So when you're thinking about implementation, do you find that, is it an all or nothing kind of thing? So you really have to bring in a new tool and it covers all of your all your business divisions or all of your product lines or all of your manufacturing sites? Or can you bring it in, just to cover as a pilot, let's say, for one manufacturing site or one product line, one business unit? What are you seeing in the market?
Yeah, we are seeing predominantly, I would say, a couple of years back, it started off with organization just want to try out with one business unit.
Yeah.
They just want to try out with one business unit because there's a lot of risk, right? It's a direct material spend. It is critical. It's critical processes, supply chain processes, which can shut a plant down. So nobody wants to take the risk.
Yeah.
So we started to see, and this is actually an exact scenario in one of the largest tier 1 manufacturing organizations, where they actually brought in our solution to work to help bridge the gap between engineering and procurement to drive strategic sourcing as well as the product quality planning process in one business unit.
Mm-hmm.
Then once they saw the success in rolling out to the one business unit and everybody felt comfortable, now there's actually a bigger push to launch across their multiple business units, not only in one geography, but across multiple geographies. And it's also about risk management, right? Because a lot of organizations want to manage risk because this is not the only project most organizations are focused on. There is ERP upgrades, as you rightly called out. There is customer management, CRM upgrades. There is also, in general, new plants are being built, new businesses are being launched. So there's multiple different things in play, and organizations are taking this look. At the same time, there are also very mature organizations where they have good amount of support, where the processes are very mature. Where some of these organizations are going the full bang, which is ability to roll out these common processes, common system across all their multiple plants at the same time. Mm-hmm. Now, it may not happen all of them going live on a single day, but it's actually stacked around so that it gradually gets rolled out across the entire set of business units they have across multiple geographies.
Yeah, so it's a single kind of launch, but staggered based on prioritization.
Yeah, single kind of launch, but staggered, and at the same time, again, it's all about maximizing scale.
Yeah.
So we see both scenarios, but again, organizations are more and more comfortable starting to look at much larger deployment scenarios. Mm-hmm. But everything depends on, to be honest, everything depends on the maturity of organization, the budget an organization has to implement these systems, and also the bandwidth or the resources they have internally to make it happen.
Yeah. So I guess it's kind of the last question on implementation and bringing in a new system. For those that you see who are best prepared, like who's at the table? Which different stakeholders across the business are they bringing to be part of the scoping, the decision-making process, and then being a part of the implementation?
Yeah, so the folks at the table are all dependent on what solutions you're putting in place. Yeah. So your initial question was, are you seeing the upstream kind of solutions in place or the traditional procure to pay? So the answer is, we have talked so far about upstream. There's also, we are starting to see also what we call or planned procurement, which we'll talk in a few minutes. But when it comes to our upstream in terms of driving strategic sourcing combined with the product development and new product introduction, typically you see folks from the procurement organization, the program management organization, who are actually going to be core in terms of rolling these processes out. We also encourage people from if it's a quality planning process, there's quality stakeholders involved at the get-go.
Yeah.
Without a quality stakeholder, typically we don't really launch a quality planning deployment. If it is a product development with the bill of material integration, you typically require IT involvement simply because this is where IT doesn't have to do a lot because now systems are a lot more flexible, formats are available, it's much easier to integrate. At the same time, the procurement doesn't have authority or access to these IT systems. That's where we involve IT leadership. In a nutshell, as a best practice at Ivalua, we typically have IT at the table simply because we need to get in from the because it's all about systems. It's just not about addressing business processes. It's all about systems. We got to make sure that IT information technology is comfortable with the security needs as well as all the other things which is required to bring up a solution in the cloud, especially in this day and age.
So you talked a little bit about the downstream. I know we didn't touch on that yet, but you referenced it. So I wonder if you could just speak a little bit to the differences perhaps you see when companies are looking to bite off the downstream rather than the upstream.
Yeah, so every organization has different needs. You're going to see a lot of upstream in discrete manufacturing, people who are making parts, which goes into a final product which they sell to consumers, right? It can be in automotive, it can be high-tech device manufacturing, etc. So in the case of downstream, where we see a lot of opportunity is what we call planned procurement or supply chain collaboration.
Okay. So
traditionally, what organizations have done is for their indirect, they have actually chosen a solution which is an e-procurement provider, which does indirect materials typically bought through a catalog. In the case of direct, you are not buying items through a catalog. It has to go through a forecasting and demand forecasting process. You have to go through MRP run. And based on MRP run, you know what your demand is going to be, what your order is going to be, what your schedule lines are going to be for all these different parts based on the daily or a weekly or monthly MRP runs, depending on the organization. And one of the challenges many of these organizations face today is the lack of collaboration between the buy side and the sell side.
Yeah.
Because what happens is in a traditional ERP environment, MRP runs happen daily, nightly, or weekly, and once MRP produces the list of orders which needs to be placed, orders get placed. But even though the order gets placed, supplier may not have the right amount of quantity, or he may or may not have the right amount of quantity shipped from a plant which is nearby to their main buying plant organization.
Yeah.
So the collaboration where the supplier has to come back and say, I really need to change the quantity here. I can't really supply X amount which you're asking for. I can only do Y, and if you need the remaining, I can ship it from a different plant. That collaboration and the visibility to that information currently is not driven through ERP. So ERP doesn't have a supplier-facing, for lack of a better word, interface or a portal. Typically, it's all done through EDI, and EDI, as you know, it's a one-to-one communication, and it's very segmented.
Yeah.
Then
it's usually email. Anything gets done.
Yeah, or email. You will not believe. Even many large organizations still use emails to communicate and send purchase orders through emails or scheduling agreements through emails. So that's one thing we are starting to see in many organizations coming to us in terms of better collaboration, better visibility, because the market has become very dynamic, right? With the advent of the Amazons of the world, organizations have to be a lot more dynamic in terms of fluctuations. So using traditional ERP system, you're not going to be very dynamic because you don't have visibility. You don't even know when your part is going to be shipped unless the supplier actually decides to send you an ASN or sends you an email back. That's one thing we are starting to see on the supply chain collaboration side, where organizations want to start collaborating between the buy side and the sell side. The other piece of the puzzle is many years back, this 20, 30 years, 25 years back, many organizations felt the need for building some internal portals to offset what ERPs could not do, work with suppliers.
Yeah.
So now we are starting to see, in fact, every conversation I'm having is about replacing those internal portals.
Interesting.
So the internal portals actually functioned as a bridge for suppliers to come in and provide some feedback. Now, a lot of organizations are coming back and saying, well, I can't continue to maintain these internal portals. Times are changing. It's expensive to do it, and it's not very dynamic. We still have to spend a lot of money doing it. And plus, it's not our core business. So why do these things?
It worked. So, it was like a bridge, but it
was like a bridge. Correct. It was like a bridge, and they want to get situated and streamline the processes.
Yeah.
It served a need. Now they want to adopt modern technologies, provide better visibility, and also replacing these portals with technologies which will tie both supply chain and procurement together. Previously, that was not the case. The portal work was maintained by the IT department. The supply chain planners, they all use ERP systems or some other planning systems to do their own thing. They had some level of integration, but a holistic approach in making sure the planning teams, supply chain planning teams work with procurement teams as well as procurement work with product development, those did not happen. And with some of the newer technologies in place, those are the synergies which are actually, as I said earlier, bridging the gap internally between the different departments and also externally with the suppliers through inter-enterprise collaboration. I think that's the name of the game. If you really think about digitization in a manufacturing organization, especially for procurement.
Yeah. Well, Sundar, I want to thank you so much, first of all, for the insights that you've given in terms of what digitization looks like for procurement in the manufacturing space and really how to hit the ground running and to look at all your options and start thinking about how you can implement something that's a little bit more modernized than perhaps some of those legacy systems that a lot of organizations are still running with. But I want to ask as a kind of final question. So if you think about those companies that you work with who have done all this, they have got the technology in place. What's next for them?
Many of the organizations we work with, at their core, they are using procurement to drive efficiency and automation, right? To drive efficiency and automation is almost like key table stakes for them to be successful. But end of the day, these organizations are basically geared to drive innovation and be more strategic because innovation is their competitive differentiator. Yeah. So we are starting to see organizations moving towards pillars around being competitively differentiated from the rest of the market. And in order for them to go there, they need to start with making sure their supply chain and procurement are highly efficient and highly automated so that they actually can create the capacity to innovate. Because a lot of times you see procurement organization and supply chain, involved in very mundane stuff in terms of running their teams and fighting daily fires. Yeah. If you do not really fix those processes and get the procurement organization, which is especially the people, the workforce which are the greatest assets for any company. Yeah. You need to get their assets to do more value-added things, and which is all coming into being a lot more innovative and drive innovation in the supply chain. And a lot of times people don't think procurement, they don't associate procurement with innovation. It's very strange people don't do that because procurement can actually help product development to be a lot more innovative. Yeah. Building products which are a lot more sustainable, for example, or coming up with more suppliers who are actually a lot more innovative compared to some of the competition has to offer. So that's where a lot of these organizations are going or gearing their workforce, especially the procurement and supply chain teams, to be more strategic in their outlook and drive better innovation, working very closely with their counterparts in manufacturing as well as in product development.
Yeah, and that's I remember back when I was working within the automotive space, innovation was truly, we talk about it a lot in procurement, and we talked about it, I think, over the last 20 years, procurement can be an innovator. And in a lot of industries, we've kind of struggled to be there and to do that yet. Within manufacturing, it's a perfect opportunity because, once you are, with it being very product oriented, I guess it's a little bit, it's easier to touch and feel than some of the other innovations you may get in services that are more business process, business model related innovation. But once you design something into a product, it's there for 5 years or 3 years or whatever the life is. And so you got to get it right the first time, and it makes it even more important, I think, to be bringing those innovations in at the beginning of a product development journey, and getting all the information that you need so that when you're developing the next iteration, you already have those suppliers primed and ready to go.
Absolutely, you nailed it. That's typically where we are seeing some of our customers going towards, which is they realize in order to be successful, they need to have the three elements: people, process, and technology. Yeah. Right. So you can get the greatest technology and get the process in order, but you don't help the people to be successful and try to be more strategic. You're not going to drive innovation, and if you stop driving innovation, and that's the end of their journey. Most organizations know that, so that's how you differentiate, given where we are in this world.
Well, Sundar, I want to thank you again so much for joining me today. My very last question is, I always say it's the easy question, and that is, if any listeners would like to reach out, connect with you, have a chat a little bit more about digitization within the manufacturing space, what's the best way for them to do that and to get hold of you?
Best way is to reach out to me through LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There's also user groups in LinkedIn which I'm associated with. They can talk to me directly or contact me directly through LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter, so there's multiple places. It's a glass house now, so you can find me very easily in all the social media channels.
All right. Well, what I will do, Sundar, is I will include all the links to your social media profiles in our show notes page that's going to go with today's episode. Not sure yet what the episode number is going to be, so the best way to find those for anybody listening is just to go to artofprocurement.com/podcast and hit the search button if you don't see it right there in front of you, the episode, and just search for manufacturing. And I'm sure this episode will come up in the search. So that's probably the best way to go, is artofprocurement.com/podcast. Do a search, and all the contact details for Sundar will be in the show notes. So Sundar, thank you very much. Just really appreciate your time today. Hi there. I want to thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. You can check out all of our back catalogue at artofprocurement.com/podcast, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's show, I'd love if you would tell a peer, or perhaps go and rate and review by going to artofprocurement.com/review. Word of mouth really is the best way to help the podcast grow, and if you're able to do either one of those things, I would truly appreciate it.